This is Tory MP Imran Ahmad Khan, or at least former Tory MP. The party's now ejected him after he was found guilty of sexually molesting a 15-year-old boy in 2008. According to the victim's court testimony, Khan forced the boy to drink gin before pushing him onto a bed, asking him to watch pornography with him, and groping him. The boy then fled. In their evidence, his parents described him as shaking and inconsolable after the event. Within hours of the verdict, the Conservatives chucked Khan out of the party. But it's a case of too little too late, because during the trial, it emerged that the Tories had known about the case for years. Khan was elected MP for Wakefield in 2019, the first Conservative to hold the seat in nearly 90 years. Before that election, though, the victim contacted the Conservative Party, horrified at the prospect of his abuser entering Parliament. The Guardian reports that the victim said, "I explained this and said, he sexually assaulted me when I was a child, when I was 15. He said the woman he spoke to sounded shocked and passed him on to someone else who sounded more stern and asked if he had any proof. I said, yes, there's a police report. And she said, well, and that was it. I said, I'm going to contact the police. And she said, well, you do that." The Conservatives claimed they could find no record of that report. So not only did the party not take the victim's complaint seriously, they're saying they didn't even write it down. And it emerged that the Tories also knew that Khan had form as a sexual predator. The Times reports Khan maintained that his victim was lying, but jurors were told about another attack in which Khan performed a sex act on an aid worker in Pakistan in November 2010. The British High Commission and the Foreign Office was said to have been told about the incident at a guest house, but no action was taken. Sean Larkin, QC for the prosecution, said during legal argument that Khan had not been charged over the incident because of a mere technicality. And it gets worse. Khan tried to stop the press from reporting on the case. Before the case came to trial, Khan argued in court that he should be granted anonymity. He claimed that as a member of the Ahmadi Muslim sect, his life would be put at risk if his admitted drinking of alcohol and homosexuality became public knowledge. Despite Khan being backed by a former head of MI6 and Foreign Office officials, the court did not uphold that request. Even though the Tories were quick to act in this case, once it became really public, there wasn't total unity in their ranks. Tory MP and former Minister for Justice, Crispin Blunt, was quick to come out in Khan's defence. The MP, who chairs the all-party parliamentary group on global LGBT+ rights, accused the judge of getting the decision wrong. He said, "I'm utterly appalled and distraught at the dreadful miscarriage of justice that has befallen my friend and colleague Imran Ahmad Khan, MP for Wakefield since December 2019. His conviction today is nothing short of an international scandal with dreadful, wider implications for millions of LGBT+ Muslims around the world. I sat through some of the trial," he said. "The conduct of this case relied on lazy tropes about LGBT+ people that we might have thought we had put behind us decades ago. As a former justice minister, I was prepared to testify about the truly extraordinary sequence of events that has resulted in Imran being put through this nightmare start to his parliamentary career." That's the line I wanted, nightmare. He calls this Khan's nightmare, with no mention of the victim's ordeal at all. Reaction was swift. 4 members of the LGBT+ group in Parliament resigned, though none of them were Tories. And Keir Starmer called for Boris Johnson to remove the whip from Blunt. But the government merely distanced itself from Blunt's statement.
Does the government distance themselves from the comments of one of their own?
Yes.
That's fairly straightforward. Do you expect him to retract it?
I don't know, because I have no idea what it is that Crispin is referring to in the comments that he said. All I know is that in a court of law yesterday, Mr. Khan was found guilty. And I think every one of us who believes in the judicial system and the rule of law has to respect that judgment. And I think it's for Crispin to account for his words, but it's not something the government associates itself with.
Not something the government associates itself with. Well, as long as the government associates itself with Crispin Blunt, they're associating themselves with this, and Blunt is still a Tory MP. So it wasn't long before Blunt apologised. "On reflection, I've decided to retract my statement," he said, defending Imran Ahmad Khan. "I'm sorry that my defence of him has been a cause of significant upset and concern, not least to victims of sexual offences. I'm not sorry I defended a convicted paedophile, but I am sorry if it upset you," the classic form of apology.
I've been thinking about this a lot recently because, against my better judgment, I actually just finished off the Jimmy Savile documentary on Netflix. And obviously, we also have the recent attention given to the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell and by default, Jeffrey Epstein. Obviously, this case isn't on the scale of those cases in terms of how far they went, in terms of the number of victims. But it really brought home to me how endemic sexual violence is, and particularly sexual violence against minors is to the establishment. You know, between Harvey Weinstein and his hold over cultural production in the US and globally, which it seems the glue of that was very much sexual violence against women. Or, you know, Jimmy Savile and his incredibly close relationship with Margaret Thatcher and the royal family. At one point, he was basically Prince Charles's like informal advisor. Thatcher personally lobbied for Jimmy Savile to get a knighthood. And then obviously you have like the very deep connections that Jeffrey Epstein had with political and cultural elites. It's very clear to me that there is a deep connection between power and sexual exploitation, between power and sexual violence. It seems to be part of the way in which this network is kind of held together. In the case of Jeffrey Epstein, we know that, or there are suspicions at least, that he participated in these, or kind of orchestrated these child sex trafficking rings as a way of getting something on powerful people, as a way of gluing powerful people together through this kind of horrifying network where, you know, everyone knows what's going on, but everyone is kind of implicated in it. And, you know, I don't mean this connection between sexual violence and power. I don't mean it in this sort of like deranged Pizzagate way. This is not kind of going into that conspiratorial line of thinking. I mean it in a very concrete way, in a way that is actually very well documented. And this is what came to my mind, not only when you see the very knee-jerk reaction to Crispin Blunt, who sort of was immediately ready to dismiss these allegations, despite, I'm pretty sure, having no legitimacy to do so, other than saying, that's my mate, and I don't think my mate would do that. But also the vile shrouding of his defense in the language of, you know, the rights of LGBTQ Muslims, which in itself is a deeply racist and homophobic thing to even bring up in this context. But it's also, on a more general level, the casual dismissal of these allegations as something that shouldn't disqualify someone from running for office. It makes me feel like these kinds of allegations are somewhat pedestrian within these internal networks. Within the establishment, allegations of these kind are not a cause, it seems, for concern, but in fact, it's those against whom these allegations are made that their sympathies seem to lie. And obviously, when you see that initial interaction that the victim had with the police, despite it being absolutely central to how they justify their existence, the police are actually completely and utterly incapable of preventing and helping communities heal from sexual violence. In fact, more often than not, they participate in the abuse and the gaslighting that is part and parcel of sexual violence. So here we really see, I think, you know, for me, that the ease and the pedestrian way in which allegations of this kind were treated tells me that there's something deeper there, as I saw in that sort of Jimmy Savile documentary, and you see when you find out more about things like Jeffrey Epstein and all of this, that this is a lot more systemic than perhaps we might originally think just looking from the outside.
Yeah, one of the striking things about that BBC interview with Andrew Windsor, or Prince Andrew, to his friends, is that he apologizes for bringing his family into disrepute, for, you know, embarrassing his family. But he explains that he had to go and visit Jeffrey Epstein even after he was a known sex offender because he owed loyalty obligation to his friends. It's very telling that women affected by sex trafficking just don't feature in the story because they're not people who matter. I mean, that's the relationship between sexual violence. Rape is, as feminists have long said, a political crime, because that's the relation between sexual violence and all the other kinds of violence of a class and imperialist society. There are some people who matter, and there are other people who are just there to be used, who don't really matter as human beings at all.